So Mark is the shortest of all the four Gospels. Mark has got 678 verses, which is less than Matthew, Luke, and John. Mark mentions explicitly that Jesus was baptized by John. And you may ask, but was not Jesus baptized by John also in the Gospel of Matthew? And I will say yes, but he was baptized in Matthew after John raises objections and after Jesus gives John permission. In other words, it is unambiguously stated. It is unambiguously stated by Mark that Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. In Matthew's Gospel, John, as soon as he sees Jesus coming, raises objection when he says, I should be baptized by you and you are coming to me. And Jesus says, no, let it be. I'm giving you permission, almost let it be so, to fulfill righteousness. And then John baptizes Jesus. Luke will not even tell us who baptized Jesus, because before the baptism of Jesus, John is in prison. In chapter 3, verse 20, John is in prison and Jesus is baptized in chapter 3, verses 21 and 22. So if John is in prison before the baptism of Jesus, he could not possibly baptize Jesus. So Mark states it unambiguously. Matthew and Luke will make changes because of the fact that they want to show something more than that, and what more than that we shall see when we come to the text. Unlike Matthew and Luke, in Matthew 4, 1 to 11, Luke 4, 1 to 13, who had the three temptations. And supposing I were to ask you, what are the three temptations? What will you say? Respond in the chat. What are the three temptations? Respond in the chat. In Matthew and Luke, there are the three temptations. Respond. What are the three temptations? Come on, come on. I want some answers in the chat. No one is responding. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, say yes, you can hear me, and then respond. Bow down and worship me. Could you specify? Bow down and worship me. Turn stone into bread. Turn stones into bread. Okay, there is one person who said, could you specify according to which gospel? Now that is the correct answer. Please remember, could you specify according to which gospel? In other words, which gospel are you talking about? Because I just told you that the three temptations are in Matthew and Luke. They're not in John, they're not in Mark. First. Secondly, in Matthew's gospel, the order is stones into bread. Taking Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple and asking him to throw himself down. And third, being offered the kingdoms of the world. This is the order in Matthew. Stones into bread, pinnacle of the temple, kingdoms of the world. In Luke, it is not stones, plural, no, it's stone, singular. Stone into bread, the kingdom of the world, and third is the pinnacle of the temple. So the order is different. Why is the order different? It seems more likely that Luke has changed the order because for him, the temple is the climax. Luke's gospel begins in the temple with Zechariah when he's given the message about the birth of John the Baptist. It continues in the temple. As a matter of fact, even in chapter 22 and 23, after Jesus has discussed and dialogued and argued with the religious authority of his time and overcome all their arguments, he continues to sit and teach in the temple. So Jesus is not against the temple in the Gospel of Luke. The temple is that place. And that's why Jerusalem is the place in the Gospel of Luke. So when the disciples in chapter 24, verses 13 to 32, are moving away from Jerusalem and going toward Emmaus, they are moving away from obedience to disobedience. They are moving away from hope to lack of hope. They're moving away from Jesus to Satan. And that's why, for Luke, the temple is the climax. The temple is the third temptation. Notice, so Matthew, stones into bread. Temple, pinnacle, kingdom of the world. Luke, stone into bread. Kingdoms of the world, pinnacle of the temple. And the reason is because for Luke, the temple is the climax, and Luke places it third. For him, the temple is very, very important. The Sabbath was made for the human person and not the human person for the Sabbath. This is a very, very strong statement, which in a way turns the whole idea of rules and regulations on its head. Where Jesus very, very clearly is speaking about how the human person must always and every time take precedence over rules and regulations. So rules and regulations are at the service. And notice, this symbol of the Sabbath was the symbol, if there ever was a symbol. It identified the people. So how is it that you are different from others? By the symbols, by the traditions that you hold on to. That makes you different. So we observe the Sabbath, and we are different from the Gentiles who do not observe it. This was the understanding. We have been given the Sabbath by our God. It is precious to us. But in the process of it becoming precious, it can become so precious that it even becomes more precious than a human person. And so Jesus has got to correct that understanding. And so therefore, this is a radical statement. You're challenging almost an institution. The institution of the Sabbath, the tradition of the Sabbath, this symbol of the Sabbath, which is so important to the practice of the religion. That is what made us who we are. That is what defined us. That is what identified us. That is what set us apart. And now you're saying that that's not as important as human person. It can be challenging to accept when your metaphors are broken, when your symbols are broken, when your institutions are broken. It can be a challenge, and that's why this is a radical statement. The family of Jesus comes to restrain him, and the family come out quite negatively in the Gospel of Mark. The family are told by others that he has gone out of his mind. And it is not surprising, because the behavior of Jesus could not be considered as normal behavior. To be an itinerant preacher, to talk about God's love as loving human beings over and above everything and everyone else, to talk about the fact that you have come for sinners, to talk about the fact that you have God's kingdom is available before our repentance, is not easy to accept. And so when people heard his proclamation, when they saw his behavior, eating and drinking with tax collectors and sinners, calling a tax collector, calling people who were fishermen and telling them that now they will fish for people, would seem absurd. So in a way, it is not as surprising that people will think that he's out of his mind. We should not really think that people had gone out of the mind. No, they saw this is not really how a normal person behaves. And sometimes when we see that a person is behaving in an extraordinary manner, a manner which we cannot understand, there is the danger we might label the person, we might stereotype the person. Now, the fact is that I cannot understand this behavior. I'm not talking of it being right or wrong. I'm talking about my inability to comprehend, my inability to understand. And when I cannot do that, sometimes my label is absurd, my label is mad, my label is out of the mind. So here, those who had observed Jesus' behavior thought he's out of his mind and told his family. Now tell me, if somebody were to tell a member of your family that there's something wrong with you, would not your family be concerned? Surely they would be concerned. So on the surface level, the family coming to restrain him is concerned. However, sometimes there are also hidden agenda. And the hidden agenda is that we don't want to be scandalous. We don't want somebody from our family to cause a bad name. We have got such a nice name in our village and we need to maintain that name. Now, this fellow is going out and creating this bad name for them. People are saying he's mad, so they might think that we also are mad. So it can be understood. We must understand it. But the point is this, that whether those who said he's out of his mind or whether the family, the fact is that they did not understand Jesus, that is clear. Now, when we cannot understand something, we could try to understand. Or we can say, I do not want to, and go. The family said, we do not want to, and they went away. It is only in the Gospel of Mark among the synoptics where Jesus is referred to as Son of Mary and we are given his occupation. Is not this the carpenter? Now, Matthew 13, 53 to 58 has a similar text which here in Mark chapter 6 verses 1 to 6a, and this refers to chapter 6 verse 3 in which Jesus is quoted, in which the people are quoted. Very clearly we are told that there Matthew will not allow Jesus to be insulted. So the Matthean group will say, the Matthean townspeople will say, is not this the carpenter's son? So in Matthew 13, 53 to 58, when Jesus goes to his hometown, he will be identified as, is not this the carpenter's son? And then he's not his mother called Mary, and so on. So notice, Matthew will change that in all probability because Matthew possibly saw this, and the way many see it, as an insult. And what is the insult? Usually, a person was known by his father or by her father. Usually, in a patriarchal society, the father was given prominence and precedence. So, usual way was the Matthean way. Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his father named Joseph? Is not his mother called Mary? And so on. But to refer to a person as the son of his mother could mean, on the surface level, that the father was in heaven. The father had died. The father was no more. But, and see in the context of Mark chapter 6, verses 1 to 6, I think that the reason why they said Son of Mary was to say, we know who his mother is, but we do not know his father. In other words, he is born illegitimately. This is my interpretation of the reference to Jesus as Son of Mary. John's gospel, especially in John chapter 9, will have the miracle of a man born blind from birth, or the born blind who was blind from birth, whom Jesus heals by using external methods, by putting a paste spittle on his eyes and asking him to wash in the pool of Siloam. That's in the Gospel of John. In the Synoptic Gospels, with the exception of Mark, in two places, Mark 7, 31 to 37, and Mark 8, 22 to 26, that Jesus uses external methods. Matthew and Luke do not have these miracles in their Gospels. These are exclusive to Mark, and they are the only two in which Jesus uses external methods. Why he does it, we shall see when we come to the text proper. The parable called the parable of the growing seed, but which I prefer to call the seed growing secretly, is found only in the Gospel of Mark, special to the Gospel of Mark, and is a very, very challenging parable, which in my opinion summarizes the meaning of life. Jesus in the Gospel of Mark is rejected by the religious leaders. Jesus is rejected even by the Gentiles as represented by Pilate and the Romans. Jesus is rejected totally and completely even by his disciples. In other words, Mark portrays this total abandonment and by his disciples in this manner. First, they all deserted him and fled. This verse is mentioned only by Mark 1450. 1450. Second, only Mark has this particular scene, namely Mark 14:51 and 52. That is where a young man comes out to see. And he comes out to see, and then he says, looks at the situation, doesn't say a word, leaves the loincloth. He has only a loincloth. He leaves the loincloth and runs away naked. So Mark uses this to show the total abandonment of Jesus. Mark often, and to be very specific, it seems 6 times, other scholars may see 1 or 2 more times, but 6 times very clearly, Mark uses the sandwich construction in his gospel. And so the question is, what is the sandwich construction? The sandwich construction is a manner of writing in which an incident or an episode is begun. So here you notice the episode, which I term, this is my term, this is my title, the physical family of Jesus. In chapter 3, verses 20 and 21, the physical family of Jesus. You notice that is interrupted because the next time that there is mention of the family of Jesus is in Mark 3:31. And so the question is, what happens from verses 22 to 30? What happens is the interruption is given to us. The reason for the interruption is because in between the physical family of Jesus and Jesus speaking of his true family, in between that is the Beelzebul controversy. So, if I were asked to define the meaning of sandwich construction, this is what I would say. A sandwich construction is a manner of writing in which an incident or episode is begun. It is interrupted by another whole incident or episode, and then the earlier interrupted incident is continued and completed. We can see that definition in the context of the family of Jesus. We are introduced in verses 3, 20 to 21, to the physical family of Jesus, who we are told, have been told that he is out of his mind, and they come to restrain him. This is all we are told. We are given their intention that they come to restrain him. And so we are asked ourselves, did they restrain him? Did they not restrain him? So in a way, there is a certain kind of anxiety on our part. They were told he's out of his mind. We have come to restrain him. Will they succeed in their restraining him? We want to ask. Mark will say, wait, have a little patience. Do not be anxious. And Mark will bring in the Beelzebul controversy. What is the Beelzebul controversy? Where scribes from Jerusalem come to Galilee and accuse Jesus of casting out demons by the prince of demons. Jesus, of course, responds in the way in which only Jesus can. However, after the controversy is over and after Jesus responds, once again, we are told about the family, because Jesus is sitting inside. The family is waiting outside. Already shows their position, both physical and spiritual. The physical position is outside, and because they want to restrain him, the spiritual position also seems to be outside. And then the definition of true family is made. So the point of this sandwich construction, in which the physical family incident is interrupted by the Beelzebul controversy and then renewed and completed again, is first to maintain a suspense. Will the family restrain him? And second, more importantly here, to say that just because you are related by blood to Jesus, just because you are physically related to Jesus, does not mean that you will not accuse him of being on the side of Beelzebul. Just because you are a relative of Jesus physically by blood does not mean that you will not say that Jesus is on the side of Beelzebul or is casting out demons by the prince of demons. Just because you are a religious authority does not mean that you cannot be related to Jesus. So relation to Jesus is not determined by physicality alone. It does determine, but not alone. So that means just because you're a member of his family, just because you've given him birth, just because you are a blood relative, does not mean you can be related to him. Second, just because you do not belong to the physical family of Jesus does not mean you cannot be related to him. Third, just because you belong to the physical family does not mean that you cannot make the same accusations against Jesus that the adversaries make. So these are 3 points of this sandwich construction. And the reason why Mark has narrated this in the manner of a sandwich construction is to give both these events a deeper meaning than otherwise. Another example of the sandwich construction is Mark chapter 5, verses 21 to 24, where Jesus is told that Jairus' daughter is sick. As a matter of fact, he's even told she is on the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, Jairus says, and she will live. She's at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her and she will live. Notice now, this is what Jesus, we are told, that Jesus starts going with him. He starts going with him in verse 24. And Mark stops the story. And as readers, we get a little upset. Mark, the girl is at the point of death. She's about to die. The father of the girl has said that Jesus has started going with him. Why do you interrupt your story? Why are you keeping us in suspense? Does Jesus reach before the girl dies? We know that Jesus can heal the sick. We know that he can cleanse lepers. We know he can heal a withered arm. We know he can heal paralysis. We know he can calm the storm. We know all these things, but we do not know whether he can raise the dead. So we want Jesus to reach before the girl dies. As a matter of fact, those words of Jairus are also in keeping with Mark's strategy. My daughter is at the point of death. And Jairus believes, come and lay your hands on her and she will live, because she's at the point of death. But we don't know whether she will be raised by you. We don't know. So our suspense is tremendous. Will he reach? Will he not reach? And notice, for 10 whole verses, Mark interrupts. He says, wait, take it easy. Take it easy. Do not be agitated. Do not be anxious. Things will work out. And notice, this is a very good lesson in these times. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken the wind out of many of our sails. And we are anxious. And we are worried. And we are saying, when will this end? And we are saying, will we ever be able to meet people again? Will we ever be able to sit in a classroom where we can see the professor, where I raise my hand and the professor sees my hand and stops the lecture? Now I'm putting all of these things in chat and nobody's answering me. The professor is pretending as if the professor doesn't know anything. He doesn't realize the chat is going, and so on. So there is that anxiety. There is that anxiousness. There is that, when will it get over? And possibly, like Mark is telling us in this incident, the Lord is saying to us, wait. Do not get upset. Do not lose hope. Do not give it. And the way to do it is to look positively at everything. And the way to be positive is to try to live one moment or one day at a time. Don't even take one day at a time, because one day at a time is 1,440 minutes, 86,400 seconds. That is too much in a day. So take one moment at a time. And this is what Mark is saying to us in this incident. He's telling us, wait. The girl is sick. Jesus begins going, but I'm going to interrupt, because I want my story to be interesting to you. So you're reading about this woman and Jesus looking around him and the disciples trying to hurry him up. Lord, there are so many people touching you. What are you talking about? And so on. And Jesus is quite cool and calm. Keeps on looking, who touched me, who touched me, who touched me? And we are getting agitated, but we should not. So we can learn not from the disciples, but we must always learn from the Master Jesus. So this sandwich construction seems largely, when we come to it, we shall see the details, but seems largely to heighten the suspense. Another sandwich construction, the third of the six, which I'm going to suggest to you, is that the disciples in the Gospel of Mark are sent on mission, and notice they return. However, the sending is till verse 13. The return is in verse 30. And so what happens in between verses 13 and 30, that is verses 14 to 29, it is the beheading of John the Baptist. And very clearly, now you will have an understanding of the meaning of sandwich construction and how to interpret it. The disciples here are successful in their mission. They are very successful. They return and they narrate to Jesus all that they said and all that they did. They narrate to him. However, by placing the beheading of John the Baptist in between the sending and the successful return from mission, what Mark is saying is this: that while sometimes mission will be successful in the external sense of the word, that is, your will be done. The disciples were very happy and excited because they were able to exercise, they were able to heal, and they were able to do many things. So they interpreted that as success. We were able to do what you sent us out to do. So we completed what you asked us to do. And that is one level of looking at success of mission. However, a deeper level of looking at success of mission is what happens to John the Baptist. John the Baptist was faithful to mission. And what happened to him was he had to bear the consequences. He was beheaded. So there is a warning also in this sandwich construction that if you, like John, are faithful, there will be possibly a time when you will be decapitated, when you will have to face the consequences of standing up for the truth. And by placing it in this sandwich construction, Mark is able to bring it out more clearly than otherwise. The fourth is the victory. Only in the Gospel of Mark, only in the Gospel of Mark is the victory first cursed, and notice, it is cursed till verse 14. We are interrupting that victory being cursed, and later, that is 6 verses later, in verse 20, we find that the fig tree has withered. Only Mark has got the cursing interrupted. And what is it interrupted by? It is interrupted by the clearing of the temple. Notice my term. I do not say cleansed. I do not think cleansed is the proper term. I prefer to use the term the temple is cleared, and I will tell you why. So you notice, in Matthew, the fig tree withers instantly. Luke does not have this incident. Mark alone narrates it in the question of a sandwich construction. What I would like you to do is, from the interpretation of the 3 which I have given you, go through this and check what your interpretation is. Avoid going through commentaries. So your read the text, either from the NRSV or the NRSV, read the text and see what you can come out with as the interpretation. Once again, here notice, unlike the above, I'm not even giving you the context. I'm telling you that there is something with regard to the plotting of the death of Jesus in verses 1 to 2 of chapter 14 and continued in verses 10 and 11. And in between, there is an incident which happens, which throws light on these 2 incidents. So go through them and check up. And finally, the 6th one is in chapter 14, verses 53 and 54, and has to do with Peter. And in between, it has to do with Jesus.